Life in our little cul-de-sac had always been peaceful, or at least it seemed that way. I just finished building my dream backyard, complete with a sparkling new pool that caught the afternoon sun like liquid gold. My kids laughed as they splashed around, and for the first time in years, our weekends felt ours. We waved to neighbors, tended our gardens, and kept to ourselves. But behind the picket fences and manicured lawns lurked a very different reality. Our HOA was notorious for its obsessive rulebook, and at the center of it all was Karen. She had a talent for finding every minor infraction, from misplaced garden gnomes to the exact angle of your blinds. At first, I thought her overbearing nature was just harmless nosiness. But as I hung the new pool float, I caught her peering over the fence with that calculating stare. Something told me that this summer, our summer, was about to be anything but ordinary. Little did I know the pool I had built for joy and relaxation would soon become the battlefield for control, drama, and a confrontation that would leave the entire neighborhood talking. Would I be able to protect what was mine, or would Karen's obsession with power turn my sanctuary into a public spectacle?
The first warning signs were subtle, almost laughable if they weren't so frustrating. I received a neatly typed letter in the HOA mailbox detailing a violation of the community's landscaping standards. According to the letter, my pool float storage was deemed unsightly because it slightly protruded from the edge of the pool deck. At first, I chuckled. How could a harmless float be a problem? But when Karen showed up in her usual crisp, white blouse, clipboard in hand, and began taking notes on my backyard like she was conducting an inspection for the Queen herself, I realized the issue wasn't the float. It was her. Over the next few days, the harassment intensified. A neighbor mentioned seeing Karen pacing near my fence, binoculars in hand, jotting down every minor detail. The angle of my patio umbrella, the number of towels left drying, the placement of our trash cans. It felt like living under constant surveillance. The HOA rules, once abstract and dull, suddenly felt like weapons designed to control, humiliate, and exhaust anyone who dared enjoy their property. Every mail delivery included another notice: fines for noise violations during pool use, unauthorized gatherings because I had invited a few friends over. Each letter was a carefully constructed dagger meant to provoke anxiety, and Karen was clearly enjoying the process.
One afternoon, I returned home to find a note stuck to my front gate in bold red letters. Any further violations will result in maximum fines and legal action. The words burned into my chest. Maximum fines? Legal action? All over a backyard pool? I couldn't believe this was real life. But what was worse, every time I tried to address the issue politely, Karen turned it into a power play. She would smile sweetly, nod in agreement, and then file yet another complaint the next day, claiming miscommunication or lack of compliance. It was relentless. Tension in the neighborhood began to mount. Other neighbors whispered in hushed tones, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Some had their own run-ins with Karen, stories of planted fines for trivial things, neighbors summoned to the HOA board for imagined breaches, but no one had dared to push back. I could see it in their eyes, fear mixed with frustration, a desperate hope that my confrontation wouldn't spill over into their lives. And yet, despite the growing anxiety, I refused to retreat. This pool was my sanctuary, and I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how petty or obsessive, turn it into a battlefield without a fight.
The escalation came swiftly one weekend. Karen, with her usual entourage of friends and family in tow, decided to inspect the pool area while I was hosting a small gathering. 50 people, she claimed, were invited by her for a neighborhood event, but I quickly realized the real goal was intimidation. She strutted around, clipboard waving, pointing out imaginary violations to anyone who would listen, turning laughter and casual splashing into a courtroom scene. My friends tried to shrug it off, but the atmosphere thickened with tension.
And then it happened. I found the pool gate open, the main access I had just installed with a brand new lock, and I knew immediately who had the key. Karen had not only crossed boundaries, but invaded my personal space, treating my property as though it belonged to the HOA itself. My blood boiled. The anger was sharp, almost physical. How could someone be so audacious, so calculating? It was as if every rule in the HOA handbook was just an excuse for her to flex power over anyone who dared to enjoy their own home. Determined to stand my ground, I began documenting everything. Photos of my backyard, timestamps of gatherings, notes on every interaction, every letter, every intrusive visit. I even started recording short videos, not to publicize yet, but as a personal archive of Karen's escalating obsession. Each entry made the pattern painfully clear. She wasn't enforcing rules fairly. She was waging a personal campaign, using the HOA as a weapon. Then came the official HOA hearing notice. My heart sunk when I opened it. A mandatory attendance for a board review of alleged violations. The letter detailed infractions so absurd I almost laughed aloud. Claims that the pool furniture wasn't arranged according to an unspecified guideline, that my hedges were overly vibrant, and that a slight ripple in the pool water constituted a safety risk. It felt surreal. How could mundane, everyday life become a legal battleground? Yet the threat was real. Maximum fines, legal escalation, public humiliation, all written in bold letters that made my hands shake. As the hearing day approached, the tension at home became unbearable. My family felt the weight too. My kids glanced nervously at the pool, sensing the tension between their mother, father, and the looming storm. Every knock at the door made me flinch. Every neighbor passing by felt like a potential witness to humiliation. I realized then that the fight wasn't just about a pool. It was about dignity, ownership, and the principle that a home should remain a sanctuary, not a stage for someone else's obsession. Days before the hearing, Karen's antics escalated further. Flyers appeared under neighbors' doors, warning about my reckless pool practices and urging residents to attend the HOA meeting. Rumors spread like wildfire, tales of fines, threats, and community outrage, all fueled by a single neighbor with an obsession for control. It felt as though the entire cul-de-sac had been drawn into her orbit, a web of whispers and suspicion designed to isolate and intimidate me. And then the most audacious act yet. She hosted an unauthorized inspection party in my backyard while I was out, claiming it was part of an HOA-sanctioned review. Photos circulated of her friends lounging near my pool, some dipping toes in the water, all under the banner of HOA oversight. The violation wasn't minor this time. It was a full-scale invasion of my property. I returned home that evening to find empty pool floats strewn across the deck, my privacy shredded. Anger mixed with disbelief. I was livid yet strangely calm. I realized something essential. If I didn't take a stand now, Karen would continue this unchecked. The rising tide of her obsession couldn't be allowed to drown my life in fear. By now, the tension had escalated to an almost unbearable point. Every interaction with Karen became a battle of wits and nerve. Every HOA letter felt like a ticking bomb. Every glance from a neighbor was a reminder that this wasn't just my fight. It was a spectacle of control, pettiness, and power that had ensnared the entire neighborhood. And as I stared at the pool that night, lit by the soft glow of underwater lights, I knew the next step had to be decisive. Would I find a way to protect my home without breaking rules, or would Karen's relentless harassment push me into a confrontation I couldn't predict? The answer was closer than I realized, and the moment of reckoning was coming faster than anyone could have expected.
The day of the HOA hearing arrived like a storm ready to break. I woke before sunrise, heart hammering, hands clammy with nerves yet tinged with determination. For weeks, I had documented every violation, every intrusive visit, every petty complaint Karen had filed. I had my photos, my videos, my notes, everything meticulously organized. But even with proof, I knew this wouldn't be easy. Karen was cunning, charming when she needed to be, and terrifyingly manipulative. She thrived on making people doubt themselves, and the HOA board often let her theatrics overshadow the truth. As I drove up to the community center, the cul-de-sac felt unusually quiet, almost anticipatory. Other neighbors lingered in their cars, whispers floating through the morning air like a low hum of gossip. I saw Karen across the parking lot, clipboard clutched tightly, a smug smile playing on her lips. Her entourage surrounded her, a few loyal neighbors who nodded at her every word, reinforcing her authority like a small army of compliance. She spotted me and gave a slow, deliberate wave, as though daring me to challenge her.
Inside the room, the tension was palpable. The board members sat in stiff chairs, papers stacked neatly before them, while I set up my own presentation of evidence, a digital slideshow displaying every indiscretion Karen had manufactured. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and nervous energy. As the meeting began, Karen wasted no time launching into her usual litany of accusations. Her voice was steady, practiced, dripping with feigned concern for the neighborhood, yet sharp enough to make my skin crawl. She painted me as a reckless, irresponsible homeowner, a threat to community harmony, someone who needed oversight. I listened, my pulse rising, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Every claim was exaggerated, twisted, or outright fabricated. I could feel my frustration mounting. Every word she spoke was designed to belittle, to make me feel small in front of everyone. But I refused to let her win. When she paused for effect, basking in the attention of the board and the few neighbors she had rallied, I clicked the remote to start my slideshow.
The first image appeared on the screen, a photo of Karen peering over my fence, binoculars in hand, taken the week before. I narrated calmly, but with an edge that cut through the room. This is Karen, watching my family from my backyard. This is not oversight. This is harassment. Murmurs spread through the room. I could see some board members exchanging uneasy glances. I didn't stop there. Next were the letters she had left, each one meticulously time-stamped and labeled, showing a clear pattern of personal obsession rather than concern for community standards. Then came the video clips. Karen's unauthorized inspection party, her entourage lounging in my pool, her friend casually dipping a toe in the water while she pretended it was a routine check. The room went silent, the weight of the evidence undeniable. The board members leaned forward, their earlier detachment replaced by focus, maybe even doubt. I could feel the energy shift in the room. Karen's smile faltered for a brief second, an imperceptible twitch, before she composed herself. But Karen wasn't finished. She countered, insisting my evidence was selective, claiming the photos were staged, the videos doctored. She turned to the board with a practiced, pleading expression, attempting to paint herself as the reasonable, concerned neighbor. For a moment, doubt flickered across my mind, but I held my ground. I had anticipated this. I brought out the next piece of evidence. Testimonies from other neighbors, anonymized but compelling, each recounting instances where Karen had overstepped boundaries, fined homeowners for trivial or non-existent violations, and used the HOA as a tool for personal vendettas. The board murmured among themselves. The weight of multiple independent accounts began to pierce the veneer of Karen's authority. Her confident posture began to crumble, her voice slightly sharper, almost defensive. She tried one last maneuver, an appeal to fear, warning of community chaos if my pool remained unrestricted, hinting at potential liability or safety hazards. But I was ready. Calmly, I presented the HOA's own regulations, clearly showing that my pool, the layout of my backyard, and my gatherings were fully compliant. Every claim she had made collapsed under the weight of facts.
documentation, and corroboration. I could see it then. Karen's calculated calm beginning to fracture. Her hand tightened around her clipboard, knuckles white, lips pressed in a thin line. Her eyes darted nervously as she realized that her carefully orchestrated campaign of intimidation had been laid bare. The room, once tense with uncertainty, now felt electric with anticipation. Neighbors who had whispered behind closed doors now sat openly supportive, their silent frustration finally finding a voice. The board members exchanged nods, reviewing each piece of evidence, comparing her accusations to my meticulous documentation. The turning point came when the board chair, a stern woman known for impartiality, looked directly at Karen and said, "These actions are outside the scope of HOA authority and appear targeted at a single homeowner." The words hit like a thunderclap. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief, her mouth opening as if to protest, but no sound came. For once, the mask slipped. Her composure, the carefully cultivated aura of control, vanished in an instant. The room shifted completely. The audience that had been on edge was now witnessing the unraveling of someone who had wielded power like a weapon. The board delivered their decision. The violations were dismissed, fines nullified, and directives were issued to prevent any further personal targeting of homeowners. Karen's influence, carefully cultivated over years, had hit an unassailable wall of truth. The room erupted in quiet applause, neighbors exchanging glances of relief, support, and vindication. Karen's smugness was gone, replaced with a mix of shock, disbelief, and suppressed anger.
The days following the HOA hearing felt surreal. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, our home felt like a sanctuary again. The constant anxiety, the subtle glances from neighbors, the tension that had wrapped itself around every corner of the cul-de-sac, it began to lift like a morning fog. I spent that first day walking around my backyard, touching the smooth edge of the pool, letting the sunlight glint off the water. My kids splashed without hesitation, their laughter filling the air in a way it hadn't in months. It was a small, ordinary victory, but in the context of the battle we had fought, it felt monumental. Karen, predictably, retreated behind her gates. Her presence, which had loomed over every minor detail of our lives, was suddenly diminished. There was no triumphant display of power, no public gloating. For the first time, her obsession was confronted with consequence. The HOA, now aware of the personal vendetta she had waged, had instituted checks to prevent future harassment. Rules were clarified, oversight procedures were strengthened, and the board encouraged residents to document any incidents moving forward. It wasn't just about me. It was about restoring balance, fairness, and transparency to the entire community. Neighbors, who had once whispered in private corridors and glanced anxiously at their own yards, began to open up. A few came over that afternoon, expressing relief and gratitude, sharing their own stories of Karen's intrusive behavior. Some admitted they had been too intimidated to challenge her before, fearing fines, gossip, or social backlash. Now, emboldened by the outcome, they found a voice. The neighborhood dynamic shifted subtly but meaningfully. No longer ruled by fear, it was guided by a renewed sense of community and accountability. I realized then that standing up had consequences, far beyond the pool. By challenging the abuse of power, I had given others a blueprint for reclaiming their rights and dignity. At home, life began to settle into a rhythm that felt almost luxurious in its simplicity. The pool, once a symbol of contention, became a haven again. On weekends, I watched the sunlight shimmer on the water, feeling a quiet pride. Every splash, every laugh, every casual conversation that floated across the backyard fence reinforced the fact that reclaiming control of one's life, of one's property, was not just possible but necessary. I had learned firsthand that boundaries mattered, that rules could be both protective and weaponized, and that vigilance was the only shield against arbitrary power. Months passed and the neighborhood slowly returned to a quieter rhythm. Karen's presence became less intrusive, her influence diminished, but she remained a part of the landscape, a reminder that vigilance was still necessary. I learned to maintain boundaries without hostility, to protect my home without creating animosity, and to cultivate community spirit without ceding control to those who would exploit fear. My interactions with neighbors became more intentional, collaborative, and trust-based. What had once been a source of anxiety became a lesson in human dynamics, power, and resilience. Looking back, the entire ordeal left me with a profound understanding of the delicate balance between authority and fairness. Rules, regulations, and governance exist to protect, not to dominate. Systems, when manipulated by ego or obsession, can harm even the most conscientious residents. And yet the human capacity to challenge injustice through preparation, documentation, and courage is equally powerful. I realized that the real victory wasn't merely winning a hearing or silencing Karen. It was reclaiming peace, dignity, and the principle that a home should remain a sanctuary. As the water glimmers, I hear the laughter of my children and the quiet hum of neighbors reconnecting with their community. The battle is over, but the lessons linger. Justice, preparation, and courage are timeless allies. In the end, the victory is not merely measured by fines overturned or HOA rules clarified. It is measured by the restoration of peace, dignity, and a sense of ownership over one's life and home. Karen may continue to lurk behind her gate, but her power has been diminished, her tactics exposed, and the cul-de-sac has learned an invaluable lesson. No one should live in fear of arbitrary control, and sometimes a single stand can ripple through an entire community.